Good morning, everyone. As Maria said, my name is Áine Duggan. I'm the CEO of Glen in Ireland. But really, I'm a Brooklynite, I just want to say. Having lived in the US for the last 20 years, it is near and dear to my heart, always. So we would like to have something of a challenging conversation this morning. You know, there's going to be a lot of optimism and sunny dispositions and so on throughout the rest of the day. Jessica didn't invite an Irish person to moderate the first panel because she expected a sunny disposition. I'm going to bring the melancholy of the globe to to our first conversation. And by that I mean that in terms of looking back, the idea here is to hold up a mirror to ourselves and have something of a self-critique so that we can pick up the conversation in the second panel and have a very forward-thinking conversation about where we need to go next. And so in some ways, of course, we're going to talk about the sort of positivity of achievements in looking back, but also what are the things that we could be getting more right, which is to say more left, as you know, and looking at some of the tactics maybe and some of the trends and some of the ways in which we've moved that haven't been very helpful to everybody in the movement or everybody in the community, and where might we have excluded members of our own community even as we've gained some wins along the way. So we're going to get at some of that in this conversation. I want to introduce my colleagues. So George Aziz is founder and ED of the Arab Foundation for Freedoms and Equality in Lebanon. And really, and actually the idea here is not to read the entire bio because we know you can all read and we want to get to the conversation. But really, George is a sexual rights and HIV activist, but I would say an expert from the MENA region and can bring that expertise to the conversation today. Bradbury, currently president of the Calamus Foundation, which funds many LGBT organizations and work, and possibly the largest funder of trans issues in New York at the moment. And Lewis really needs no introduction, has fought for social justice for more than 5 decades on a number of different issues, from gender equality to LGBT rights, to people of color rights and equality and justice, and so on. Mauro Cabral is joining us from Argentina, is a bodily rights activist from Argentina, and currently is the Director of Advocacy and Programs at Global Action for Trans Equality, also the Senior Advisor for Intersex Fund at Estrella, and a member of the Interim Steering Committee for the Trans Fund there. And I just want to point out, you know, just one snippet from the bio in case you didn't get to the last line. Mauro in 2015 received a Bob Heppel Equality Award, and so I just think that deserves some recognition. Binzu is the director and founder of Common Language, which was the very first civil society organization in China focused on LGBT issues, and is also the advisor founder for Chinese Lala Alliance. And then, last but not least, Steve Letsike is an activist, feminist leader, mentor, and vibrant human rights advocate, and joining us from her role as the co-chair of the South African National AIDS Council, is also the founding director of Access Chapter 2, which is a really interesting organization and has an interesting name derived from South Africa's constitution, referring to the Bill of Rights, Chapter 2, and, you know, again, has that sort of intersectional work on LGBTI people, women, in their diversity and civil society's participation in public policy development processes. So we're going to start this off by asking all of the panelists to chat about their work in terms of a global context, right? We're here at a global summit, and so what does it really mean to be doing the work that they're doing in their various regions? But in the so what does it mean to be working locally, but in the context of a global world and a global movement, and to what extent that global movement is helpful in their work, and to what extent it is a challenge. And again, the idea here is to push ourselves a little bit and to be able to talk about the problems as much as we want to talk about the achievements and the solutions. So I'm going to start it off by handing it over to George, and we're all going to take about 2 minutes to sort of do this quick introduction question.
Good morning, everyone. I will start by speaking a little bit about the context of the MENA region. Up till 2011, the LGBT activism in the MENA region was limited to Lebanon and Palestine. Starting 2011 and with the Arab Spring, many groups started organizing around the movement. And this is when the MENA region got a lot of attention from international groups, from international donors as well. Unfortunately, the Arab Spring failed. And after this failure, the situation has worsened for many of the activists. In Morocco, the government is influenced by Islamists. In Tunisia, the attack on the LGBT community are very frequent as well. The spaces for any NGO is shrinking in Egypt, and the new government is really trying to make it hard to organize. And the same in Jordan as well, where the tribes are really influencing the decision of the government. So the situation did worsen in the MENA region, but this did not stop the LGBT movement. And we've noticed that despite all that, the movement kept growing, and we have more and more organizations now. We have around 14 organizations working in the MENA region. But unfortunately, what changed is the international support to the MENA region. And we felt that after the failure of the Arab Spring, many of the international groups and international donors said that this is a hopeless region. So we're going to pull out from this region and not support it anymore, and we felt it. And I think our major challenge with the global movement is that the interest, how it shifts, makes any organization working in a hostile environment like in the MENA region very fragile. And we keep thinking, can we count on the international support all the time? Or maybe their interest will change later on, and this will put us in danger and we'll feel alone again. So this is why we're trying to focus a lot on our regional work, but we want also to keep working with our international partners.
I said most of my experience has been in the US, so unlike the other panelists, I'm pretty parochial with what's happened in the US. However, when I think about it, the two areas that I was most involved in the 80s and 90s, before many of you were born, was with the Planned Parenthood Board and going to places like Brazil and Bolivia and other places to learn about the issues that women and their husbands and allies felt with choice and other issues. And then when AIDS started, it became an international issue. And we coordinated and worked with on various kinds of social policies and other things with organizations around the world. But I think what has always been the galvanizing force on the issues I worked on is convincing people that they personally or someone they cared about had something at stake. That was clear with HIV. In the 80s and 90s, every gay man thought they had HIV. Whether or not they did, they assumed they did. And it was life or death. Similarly, when marriage in the United States, that could be related to many people because they saw the legal, they thought, one, it made them equal, and also that it provided legal protections that were not otherwise available. And it was personally felt. I think as we go forward, one of the issues we're all going to have to face, how do we make the diverse concerns and needs of so many people in the LGBTQI community something that everyone feels is important to them and can be something they can get behind, just like they did these various other movements. And that is going to be hard. As a funder of organizations, and fortunately a friend of now being able to be in a foundation, I've found that many funders have gone away. There are certain issues they think are fine, but they're not their issues. I got that all the time. When I was at Pride Agenda, we were funding the trans issue agenda in New York State. That's wonderful. They should have their rights, but that's not us. And one of the things that's important for this group, I believe, is to show that we are all in the same boat. These denial of rights to any one member is a denial of our rights to the other one, even if you may be an affluent gay white man who can pass, you're still vulnerable, and you have to understand that we all have to have our rights, and that is going to be a challenge going forward.
Thank you for the question. I think maybe it's important to start with the idea that in Africa, for so many aching years, there's been so much silence. Up until we have these terms that only came, in the 80s. But the silence does not dismiss the fact that before, historically, same-sex practicing individuals have been existing for years, and it was known in communities. But the silence, it's about how we speak about LGBTI persons in the broader social issues. And I think it's very important to understand that in the context that that very same silence have costed lives. The very same silence has excluded LGBTI persons, meaningful inclusion and integration within the society. We've dealt with fragile, fragile democracy in Africa. I'm really raising this because of the understanding of how people can live their lives without being excluded in social institutions and many other spaces. Currently in Africa, about 33 countries still criminalize homosexual act. And it's very important to understand it's homosexual act that is criminalized, not homosexual people. It's very important, out of 54 countries. But for me, my experience having worked in the region, having worked in my country, I work in South Africa, where we have a liberal constitution. We've got a democracy that is 22 years old. But that constitution does not necessarily mean that these rights are lived realities for everyone. So I think part of why we're doing this work and our involvement, it's about translating the rights into making it a lived reality for persons on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. One of the most important things that I believe in doing this work and having done or been involved in this work for about 14 years now, I believe in accountable governance. So if we're going to ensure that we want to hold people accountable about making these rights a lived reality, it has to also be in the context that they understand from a governance point of view. If you put anyone in power to translate administration, it's about governance, and we have to hold it from a governance point of view. Secondly, if there's missing language in constitutions, we have to make sure that we can bring it based on evidence, based on realities of people to ensure that there's inclusion. Thanks.
Hello, yes. Wow, looking back 25 years, and global and local, I need to share you with this story. 1995, Beijing. I was a college student at the time, and there's a, the Beijing conference, the women's conference happening in Beijing. So that was the very first big UN event after China kind of got back to UN, system. So the government really, paid a lot of attention, put a lot of effort in making that. They built such a very, grand building in the central, central city, where it's going to hosting the conference. However, there's rumor that there are going to be a group of lesbians from the Western countries who are going to, march the street and naked. So then, because I was hoping to attend the conference at the time as a student volunteer. But then, because of this rumor, the whole NGO tent was moved, relocated to the suburb, Huairou, which I had no idea how to get there. So, but still, there is this big tent, and the local, a few, at the time, it's like 20 years ago. So only a handful Chinese lesbians kind of gather around the tent all the time. And, also the conference, I'm pretty sure there are people who attended that conference. It is an important conference for sexuality, sexual rights, and also for lesbian rights. Lesbian rights are human rights, right? At the time, it was raised during that conference. So that's a very, in the last day of the conference, last night, so the lesbians and gays decided to have a disco night inside the city, not in the suburb. So there's a big van, a full trunk of those gays and lesbians went to the city for a whole night of discos. But what's more interestingly is also because of this rumor, the Chinese government, actually they gave the volunteers of the Beijing conference a bed sheet. A bed sheet. Why? Because they're afraid that these lesbians are going to march naked. So they are ready to, to rush to the people if they're going to have a naked march or what. So they're going to wrap it, wrap the person by that bed sheet. And also there's a story published in the state media saying, about this lesbians coming to Beijing, all these Western people, and there's a proud volunteer, Chinese volunteer, saying, in China we don't have that, we don't have those, it's all Western. However, this big disco night, in this Nightman in Beijing, most popular disco bar, was actually the start of the LGBTI movement in China. Well, there's more to that story. The first big event they tried to organize was a pride event in June, in the last week of June. But remember, it was 1995, 1996, homosexuality. Well, homosexual act was still criminalized under this hooligan crime. It was still also a mental disease in China. So any public gathering of, a bunch of homosexuals, you can be arrested. So they try to organize this pride event, so they pretend it's just a birthday party. So, I think it's only less than 20 people, a dozen people gather in the bar, but then people ask, okay, whose birthday is that? So people whisper, and then this young man, in the last, he kind of spoke in tears. Oh, I know whose birthday it is. It's our birthday. It's everyone's birthday. See, we started from there. 1997, homosexuality was taken off the criminal code. 2001, it was also taken off from the mental disease. And with the rise of the HIV/AIDS, there have been flourishing gay men's groups. And in the last 10 years, I and my friends are dedicated in kind of a lesbian, LGBT movement building. So now, over the country, we have over several hundreds LGBTI groups. Well, mostly gay and lesbian, unfortunately. But we have done really, there have been achievement, steady progress every year. So I guess speaking of this year, 2016, looking ahead, sometimes we see challenges, also new challenges, both happening in China and in Europe and here in the US. But don't forget where we started. At that time, in 95, we could be arrested. We're still, mental disease patient, and we were not feared. And today, we will not be feared.
Thank you for the question. I really can't believe that I am in a panel that is going to be focused in what went wrong in the past. I had waited all my life to be in a panel like this, focus on negative things so I don't have to apologize for being negative. So thank you. Well, I am from Argentina, and and right now I'm the director of an international organization called GATE, Global Action for Trans Equality, which means that I am the Latin American director of an international organization. This means that the most frequent question that I get is, where is your boss? But for real, I'm not making this up for the panel. So one of the issues when I have to consider what it means to be part of a global movement is how power is distributed in geopolitical terms in that kind of global space. Coming from the global south, I have to say that even in my position, what we have to notice all the time is that power and money are more related with global north countries, and that with global south countries would mean that the leadership is supposed to also to become from the global north, and that's the case with most of my colleagues in international organizations. So in that position, sorry? So it means that from that position, as someone in a leadership role, I have first the concern of what it means to be someone from the South trying to speak with a global voice, and what it means, for example, for the movements that I am part of, mostly for the trans movement, but also for the intersex movement. I think a lot if someone from a global North country should be doing my job just to make sure that the person won't be facing the kind of rejection of dismissals that global South leaders have to meet in international spaces. But it also means that, specifically, thinking in terms of the trans movement of the and the intersex movement, what it means to try to build international movements out of very poor communities. Because when we think in terms of what it takes to have a global movement, we can think in terms of leadership, we can think in terms of capacity buildings. I have done capacity building trainings for 3 or 4 lives. But at the very end, it seems to be about money and the ability of these movements to meet, for example. Just to have, I don't know if you know how many international trans conferences have been out there. Do you know the number? Like 20? Let's say just, in the last 10 years. How do you imagine, like 10, 5? Just one in 2010. One conference that was not organized by trans people themselves. So we are announcing another one by the end of 2018. And what we are doing to do that, basically, is, counting coins to see if there is going to be enough money. Which doesn't mean that there is not a trans international movement out there. It means that we take every opportunity that we have to meet when our allies organize their own conferences. In the case of the intersex movement, we already had 3 meetings, but again, not organized by the intersex movement itself, but by a more powerful ally. So in that sense, when we think in terms of how trans people and intersex people can be part of a global movement, we need to say, in the first, how global South leadership is going to be integrated into that scene. And then how poor movements can be part of a quite expensive global movement, what it takes, for example, to take people to the UN or to take people for an international dialogue. And then when it comes to be about, an organization like GATE that strongly focuses on movement building, what it means for organizations all around the world, and I'm talking again from trans organizations to intersex organizations, to have to follow a very specific model of organization, the American NGO model, in order to be able to receive funds. What it means to take, an organization or a movement of organizations and networks just have to work in the same way, regardless of their own countries, if they want to be part of a so-called international movement. And what is going to happen with us if this international, the so-called international American model start, to fall down in this new political scenario. What is going to happen with our funding, with our way of working, with our advisory boards or boards of chairs of boards or reports to funders, with our funding, with our ability to participate in international dialogues, with the compulsion to communicate in English. So, for us, and sorry, but I have been put in this panel, I'm wearing black and everything, like it's supposed to be like negative, I'm sure that we can find a lot of solutions. But just to put a very brief example about the particular field of work, I am in charge of coordinating an international initiative around the reform of the International Classification of Diseases, which is the key diagnostic tool produced by the World Health Organization. And we are focused on depathologizing trans people in the context of the ICD. So depathologizing trans means for trans people to stop being considered people suffering from a mental disorder. And we have networks working on these issues all around the world, except in the US. And the dialogue with activists in the US is that they are really concerned because in the US, you need to have the diagnosis in order to have access to healthcare through a world dominated by private insurance. So in that sense, the question that we get all the time is, but how you are doing that if this is going to be so dangerous for us? And sometimes we have to remind, activists in the US, sorry, but your government is, or your insurance companies are not using the ICD. You're using DSM, which is a different diagnostic tool. And you have a work to do. You need to confront the health insurance and to get involved with a political movement that exists outside of the US. So I will say that, and that's the last thing, that in terms of building an international movement, for all of us that are sometimes really aware of the metropolis of the global north, it seems to be more easy to have international dialogues in spite of a series of different challenges. But for the people here, it seems to be very difficult to engage in that dialogue, even if the resources are out there. So how we can, save this gap and create a real international solidarity, for me, is the key issue right now in terms of, building a global movement.
Thank you to everyone. And, sort of all jokes aside, we do make apologies for focusing on what we consider to be the negative from time to time. And actually, it's not at all negative to be looking at where things are going wrong. You got to sit in the dark sometimes to be able to see where the light is coming from. And in this next question, I'm going to sort of put a couple of questions that the panel and I had prepared. I'm going to roll them together for this next one, because we do want you to be able to ask questions as well. To sort of maybe pick from the last 25 years what they would consider to be either a huge achievement in your own region or globally, but then to also look at it and talk about what was the achievement, but also what were the losses in gaining that achievement. And to give a very obvious example from my own region, clearly marriage equality is Ireland's biggest win on an LGBTI front in the last 25 years. Probably surprised most of the globe that a tiny-ass Catholic country could pull that one off. And at the same time, having just relocated there to head up the country's national LGBT advocacy organization, it's a little shocking and it's awfully sad to see how fragmented the community there is and how back on its heels it is. Because yes, we have marriage equality, but it's still not safe for a same-sex couple to walk down the street holding hands. Now, it is in some neighbourhoods, but not in all, and people don't feel safe, which is the most important point, I think. But maybe worse than that, there's a lot of infighting. People don't know what to do. The funding is all gone. And a number of different groups, including trans activists, young people with mental health issues, older people who are faced with going into institutions that are run by religious groups to live out their retirement. Like a number of issues that people feel like got left by the wayside. HIV is on the increase at a dramatic rate, and so on. And so a lot of people got left out and excluded, and they feel that, right? So I think that there was a huge win, but there were also huge losses in the process of that win. So I'd like to hand it over to George to maybe just pick up on that theme of what do you consider to be the huge win of the last 25 years, and where are the steps where we got it wrong and that maybe we shouldn't repeat moving forward?
I don't think that we're being negative, more of reflecting a little bit on our mistakes and how to correct them in the future. And I think really the movement, I started working, being involved as an LGBT activist in 2003, and since then things have changed a lot and very positively. When we first started, there wasn't a word in Arabic that means gay. The only word to describe a gay person was pervert. And we had to work on this for 10 years in order to see it changing in the media and in translation, in books and newspapers. We started with in a place where even speaking about homosexuality was impossible. We were a joke when we first started the first organization. They said, "Are you crazy? They're going to shut you down the next day." And I think that by creating the first organization, this had created a snowball effect across the region, and the movement is growing. From what I see and what I'm going to say, probably now many of you won't agree with me on it, especially that we are in a university. But what changed before for us is that we used to take actions when we thought we needed action. And in recent years, I feel that the movement has been spending more time theorizing than actually doing action, doing things, or responding to needs specifically. We became very academic in the negative part of it, in the negative meaning of it. Not in the, I mean, I'm not criticizing the academia, but specifically that we're discussing a lot theories rather than actually saying what does the community need. And by doing so, we're becoming an elitist intellectual in a way that we're excluding people who actually need to be part of this conversation. And this is how the movement slowed down, in my opinion, in the recent years.
I'm going to go back a little bit in history to the AIDS crisis as it developed in the United States. And this is kind of, I think, what happened was incredible. It created a bond in the LG communities and activated people in a way that had not been done in the United States. However, as we progressed, there were a lot of things where we allowed what I would call philosophical or wrong-headed morality to prevent practicality. And so I want to say the example is, up until 1993, every major AIDS organization in the United States had a policy recommending that people at risk do not get tested. When I went on the board of Gay Men's Health Crisis in 1989, I learned about that, and for 4 years I said, this makes no sense. And some of the leading activists who were the icons of the HIV period said, no, the discrimination is worse than the disease. But let me tell you, the people who died would not agree with that. They would rather be alive with the disease than not here. But the point was, there were things we could do. At that time, most people knew they had HIV if they did not get tested when they had PCP and they went into the hospital. Bactrim, a very common antibiotic, prevented that. The problem was that if you went into the hospital with PCP, with the immune system that was compromised, the rest of your life was a downhill slide. The more important thing is that when people know their status, they take precautions. The gay community does not have a history of sociopathic behavior where people intentionally infected people. If you knew that you were positive, you are much more likely to take precautions not to infect people, as well as if you're negative, you more than likely will be able to take better care of you. But we know that people are people and things happen. In 1993, the policy changed. Today, in the United States, the eradication of HIV is dependent upon testing. If you're test negative, on PrEP or you take precautions, and if you're positive, you go immediately into therapy. And now doctors say that someone who is caught early will have a normal life expectancy. But we allowed what I would call kind of a mistaken morality or almost sense of community outrage to be self-destructive. And I think going forward, we have to be very careful, and we have to look at practical aspects of some of the things we say. And it's a lesson that we can have all the highfalutin words, talk about justice and equality, but we have to also work on the ground and be practical all the way along. And I hope that that's the one thing we learn, and today, hopefully, HIV will around the world. It also galvanized people around the world. And the other thing is with the LGBT community, and I hope what happened with HIV is as the drugs came out, many of the funders disappeared. And that was unfortunate because as the disease spread in other marginal communities, drug users, people of color, the emphasis was gone because the funders tended not to be part of those marginal groups, but to be the gay men who now had their drugs and can move on to other issues. And so we always have to be vigilant that whatever the issues are, we have to be aware that just because our own situation may have improved, it doesn't mean that all of the others have as well.
Thank you. I think if at all we have to look at what has worked, what is it that we have achieved? I think the fact that, we are here, I think we have to really applaud ourselves for the fact that we have achieved being here and being visible, all of us. I think it's very critical. But in terms of South Africa, I think there are two people. It includes many others, of course, but I want to single out these two people. Simon Ngoli, who was in the African National National Congress. Simon Ngoli was in the treason trial during the time of apartheid in South Africa. And he was one of the few gay men who was fighting the politics at that time during apartheid. But a couple of years later, he publicly went out and said, I'm gay. A couple of more years later, he came out and said, I'm HIV positive and I'm not going to separate my struggles. These are some of the icons that in South Africa we have. The other person that I want to also single out, when you were talking about the Beijing platform, would be Bev Liditsi. Bev was one of the first lesbian women to go there and talk about lesbian issues as a woman and speak out in this global platform that speaks around gender equality. And these are people that fought in South Africa. The first South African pride. Why we have to look at pride. In South Africa, it took place in 1990. And it's very important that anywhere else, if we'd have to look at why do we achieve what we are achieving today, it's because LGBTI community are visible, and prides are one of the social spaces that brings LGBTI persons together to raise visibility. It's very critical. But I also want to thank two people who are sitting in the audience today. I want to thank Tim, Lane, and Theo. If both of you can stand up. And I'll tell you why I'm saying this. Thank you so much for all you have done in South Africa. I'll tell you why. Professor Theo was one of the people who also contributed in a study called the Levels of Empowerment Study. This is the South African first study that told us about the lived realities of LGBTI people, from accessing health, from accessing social services and so forth. And these are the first studies that we still use today and repeat to continuously look at the realities of LGBTI person. Now with Professor Tim Lane here, the first study telling us about the HIV epidemic amongst gay men in Soweto. And he was one of the architects of the study. The reason why I'm highlighting these two studies, anywhere around the history in South Africa, there's reference around these studies. And there are many people who are still sitting around here who've continuously supported LGBTI work in South Africa. Karen, Kent there is also sitting there in the room. People who can continuously shaped the language in South Africa, shaped the capacity in South Africa, and many of us who are still sitting here. And I'm glad that maybe, I'm assuming with the gray hairs around the table, I might be one of the young person in the room, or in the panel, rather. But there are three things that still strike, and I've said this a few days ago. They strike emotions in Africa. When you talk about religion, when you talk about culture, when you talk about rights, these three things strikes emotions in Africa. Africans become so wild and scared and thinking the world is going to end or it's going to open in two pieces and everyone has to go inside and burn, probably burn. But the point I'm raising, Africans are still behind. Maybe our political leaders, maybe more so. They are still behind. Everything is still in a heteronormative perspective. So when you engage political leaders, you have to start by educating them. And when you engage them further, you still need to remind them why we're doing those. So when people are empowered and people know, then they have a will. We are seeing pockets of excellence. We are seeing a little bit of changes that is taking place. But it really takes time to change the discourse and the narrative. And it will require us to ensure that we continue further with the agenda. But why I've raised this is because it's very important to recognize why we need to continue creating visibility, why we need to continue being there and fighting the issue. So it's very important if we are to achieve some of this. There are quite a number of things that I would raise, but I would raise later. But if we look at development as an agenda, in Africa, many countries are developing. So hence where we are still developing. So we're not going to expect that the integration will happen as fast as we would expect, but it's developing region. So we need to also think from that context.
All right. Well, just speaking of marriage equality, yesterday in Taiwan, we have 200,000 people in the street advocating, for the upcoming revision of the civil law to include, same-sex marriage in that law, which is great. Looks like the Taiwan might be the first in Asia to legalize. Sorry, to legalize. Okay, same-sex marriage. However, I had a very interesting conversation with a U.S. activist whose organization actually advocate exclusively on marriage equality last year. So after the federal law kind of recognized the marriage, he told me his organization kind of finished the mission and disbanded. So I was then, I was listening. I was inspired of all the great work he did. But then I also got a little bit confused. Okay, is that the kind of the future of like my organization and also the movement in China? And probably some of you don't know that the Taiwan, the original legislation proposal includes three different sets of legislation. One is kind of the same-sex marriage. The other is civil partnership. And the third is actually the freedom to form your own family, not necessarily based on even intimate relationship. You actually have the freedom to choose whoever, and even not only one person, you can form a family with 2 or 3. So that's the original 3 sets of legislation proposed like 3 years ago. But during this process, this advocacy process, because the public didn't really understand the kind of diverse family, the idea, and also from this kind of, we share the same Chinese culture, this historical background also in terms of the family. We are not familiar with this kind of civil union, civil partnership thing. The only thing we know is family, marriage, married family. So now actually Taiwan, the activists, the whole movement already dropped the other 2 proposals, only focusing marriage equality. So, I guess like 3 years ago, I was really inspired. I think Taiwan maybe is one of the very few kind of that dare to propose something, and in their legislation, to the legislative body of such a progressive idea of, like how you can, like you imagine, like imagine a family, how to imagine a family, how to spend your life with others. However, during this kind of struggle, I guess, kind of we go for an easy win in a way. It's kind of easier to get the public support if you follow the mainstream, the concept. Well, that's kind of not, I guess that's the regret I have. I hope during this, process, although the goal, the win is great, is important, but we never lose our imagination and the vision and the creativity and also our respect for diversity.
Thank you. Thank you. I will be very, very short. When I started doing activism in 1994, while studying history at university, and by that time, I don't know if there are people here that remember the 90s, but history was supposed to be over, if you remember Fukuyama, right? And we knew that, it wasn't over, but, we had a lot of issues in my country, political issues. 2001 was a disaster. By 2002, 2003, it seems that history was starting again, and we were making a lot of social changes, and things starting to improve. Maybe we can compare histories from different countries, but I'm really embarrassed for saying this, and also a bit like scared that my grandfather's ghost is going to haunt me tonight. I think that the biggest mistake that we did, and I'm talking about my friends in Argentina, maybe it's a mistake that you did, we can talk about that, is that, and again, I'm really embarrassed by saying this, but it seems that we believe that fascism was over, and that it was never going to come back. I don't know what happened from the generation, from my grandparents to my generation. We really believed that some things were over. It seems that we believed, at least in Argentina, that poverty was something that it was going to be solved by itself, that having good laws and good, policies, and for us to be, being happy, getting married, getting gender identity laws, that material issues in a way or another, jobs will be there waiting for people that now, was going to be able to get those jobs. And it seems that doesn't work that way. And something that happened with us also is that we used to believe that HIV was over, but also that TB was over. Really, to have, again, people that, the lack of medication was over, or that having a government that said, well, we were paying for medication during the last 10 years, but you know what, we are going to stop paying for this now. Sorry. So in that sense, I think that we had different achievements, but for me, this is the big time for the wake up, to see, sorry, this is not over. It's starting again. Maybe it was never over, so it's not restarting, it's just continuing. In terms of someone living in a country that started having a very bad government 1 year ago, a government that I have to remind to my American allies was really celebrated by the Obama administration, which, you know, makes a really cautionary, you know, call for global politics. There are a couple of things that we did wrong and maybe could serve as an advice. One is to believe in institutions, that institutions are going to hold. So, and I'm talking with a lot of American friends, and I'm a bit worried because they really believe that the country is going, just, you know, but we have a constitution, we have these laws, this is public policy, it's going to be very difficult to challenge this or that. Bullshit. Sorry, it doesn't work that way. So rules are changing, and, you know, we need to start thinking fast that just because you believe that the rock has been there all your life, that rock is not going to move. You know, when we are talking about this, we know the rocks can be moved. The other thing is that it's really great, you know, just to go to the streets and to organize. In Argentina, we started protesting immediately every day, but you know what? This is going to be a long struggle, which means that you need to keep energy. And I know that sounds strange, but you need to think that it's not only to demonstrate today, but to be alive tomorrow and to survive to the day after tomorrow and for the next year, and then for 4 years. And that requires a lot of organization to take care of yourself, but also to take care of the person just sitting, you know, next to you. So in that sense, by now, what we are having is that most of our social and political movements in Argentina are starting to be exhausted, and it's only 1 year, and we still have 3 years to go, at least. So in that sense, to be, you know, careful with time and energy, it's something very important. The other thing, and for me, coming from the field of philosophy and social science, this is something very difficult to say, and someone that went to college in the 90s also with all the post thing. We need our big names again. Something that we are seeing more and more in Argentina is that the left, in general, all critical movements are super divided because, you know, the minimal difference that make us allies in general, but our worst enemies, you know, when it has to do to decide about a flyer, right? So this is not the moment for that kind of differences. It's really, and I know that is something is very difficult, something that I am seeing, for example, in meetings, even we know with trans activists in Argentina, we all have very long identities, half of them related with the things that we don't eat, the other, you know, related with the people that we don't want to fuck with, but anyway, we are all poor, so, and we are all at risk of police brutality. And this is the moment, at least from my perspective, sorry if this is too, but if we are looking for a way of resisting, to find out those general things that can create some sense of unity in the struggle again. And then, because Áine asked me just to integrate, I can do that if you want. And coming from, for example, the intersex movement, but I think it's also a message for this kind of times. A mistake that we made historically is to hear people telling us that the things that we were saying were too complex, and the things that we were saying were too new for them, and that this was not the right moment to bring or claim into the struggles, and we allow other people to get away with that. That was a very clear mistake. So, for us, even in this context of you know, this call for unity, at least from my perspective, is really necessary to ask people to update their historical records and to find out the clear history of domination, how our agenda has been built, and to rearrange that the kind of political fronts or networks that we can build together.
Thank you. We have a few minutes left, so what I'd like to do is, no pressure, But if you have a really good question, this is your opportunity to ask it. And what I would just say is, if you could raise hands if you do have a question, so we can just take a quick look to see, and then maybe if we could take 2 or 3 from the floor and just let the panel take them all together. I'm just going to speed this up.
The mics are.
Oh, okay.
Oh, thank you so much. I apologize for my English. I'm not mother tongue, but there was something I wanted to ask you in your experience. I have been hearing about the challenges we face now, and most of these challenges come from the outside. So I heard about the government problems and society and so on. But I was wondering whether, in your experience, there's also challenges coming from the inside. I mean, in the movement. I mean, in my limited experience, I can say that I met people that live in the West, but they are not from the West, and they are gay and lesbians. And if I ask them, like, are you involved in your country in some movement? I mean, in some cases they would say, no, I'm not, because I don't believe in gay marriage. And and it's something for me important. And so I don't believe in that, and I see that this movement are very much involved in that. So I don't believe it. I think it's something from the West, and it's not right to import it and stuff like that. And or otherwise, I also heard people saying, I don't know, religion is very important for me. This doesn't mean that they share like many common grounds of their religion. They don't think like homosexuality is a perversion or so on, but still they think that religion is a clue issue in their life, and sometimes they don't find like these problems addressed in the movements. So I have only a limited experience, and I have no answer for this. But I was wondering if it's something you face, and in what way you face it. Like saying, I don't know, you have to come to believe that gay marriage is the best thing also for you, or you have to come to believe that you have to divide strongly, like religion, and cultivate it in your private life, and not in a public sphere, or like you incentivize, I don't know, dialogue between religion and this issue. So it's just a question. I don't have an answer or something like that. Thank you very much.
All right, we're just going to take another question so you can take both together.
Hello, thank you very much for an exceptional panel. My name's Debbie Cohn. I work for General Electric, and I lead our globalization efforts. I do have a day job as a scientist, but our employee resource group, as part of our affinity networks, is in 28 countries, and we're working on due diligence in the remaining places: Africa, Middle East, Russia, and so forth. We operate on 4 pillars: networking within our own business, other multinationals, NGOs, and governments. And my question revolves around the comments about funding that all of you have mentioned. We need you to work with us and to help us understand what's going on the ground, especially as we go into new places. I can tell you, we have employees who have opted into our network in these places where you are. We need to understand what they want, how to support them, how to do that in a safe space, especially where the local law is prohibitive. But we want to do something that's greater than 0. So from a funding perspective, I'm wondering, are you reaching out to us? We understand there are the American-based multinationals versus the companies that are in country, and there can be some differences. We just launched in China, GE after a 4-year journey, which was an exceptional event. There are at least 8 other multinationals operating there, and we want to partner with you. So my question to you is, what steps are you taking? Are you finding roadblocks? I'm definitely going to be connecting with all of you after this event, and we definitely like to better understand that. Please let us know how we can help, because we do need you to help us, and we want to work in partnership.
Okay, so maybe we start with Steve. Do you mind taking it first? And you can take one or both of those questions. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I think just to say, on the 6th of December, South Africa was celebrating the 10th year of having same-sex marriage. Now, before we even start that, because I mean, this is just not unique to South Africa, we need to recognize that, you know, every time, everywhere we go, you know, when you raise LGBTI rights, people immediately think of gay marriage. Trust me, that's not the first thing in our lives. Integrity and dignity of individual has to be recognized first. If people can't recognize the dignity or integrity of people, we can't, marriage is, it's the last thing. And also, it's not wrong when people want to get married. I think we need to allow those who want to get married, and to get married equally, like any other person. I think because, one, personal is political. It's how we put it in practice that's an issue. And amongst all of us as LGBTI movement, we are divided because of how we understand the context of issues or what comes first before the other. Others, they think health comes first. For others, they think education comes first. And it's very critical that we understand that how, as a movement, we can strategize. Now, in South Africa, we used to have what we call the Joint Working Group. That's how we got a lot of things going. The reason why we have the constitution that integrates LGBTI issues or sexual orientation and gender identity is because of this movement. Why we have gay marriage, it's because of the Joint Working Group. Why we have integrated in many policies, we've got more than 15 policies in South Africa that recognize sexual orientation and gender identity, including the criminal justice systems on its own. So I'm just raising that, you know, for others, it's how it's just put in practice and how we prioritize. And yes, we do have negative influences internally as LGBTI because of the division amongst ourselves. Just to respond to the issue that was raised here about reaching out also to private sector, I think you're raising a very critical point here. What we are seeing in South Africa, if I were to relate to that, and not only around LGBTI issues, private sector has got what we call the corporate social investments. But a study that was done by the Gordon's Business School in South Africa has already told us what is the interest of public sector or private sector, private sector to be specific. You know, private sector wants to just fund education. If they spend 80% of their education taking people to school, it's quick rep. But when we come to LGBTI issues, it's not only just funding, it's also supporting some of the weaknesses that we have. Most of LGBTI persons are not going to school, they are dropouts. Most of LGBTI persons do not seek health services because they fear discrimination and so forth. So there are quite a number of things that we need to think just beyond funding and how we go one-on-one. But I appreciate the call to work together, and we can share off some of the links we've done.
So I know that we have to wrap this panel because we have other activities waiting in other rooms. And what I would like to do is, I know a number of the panelists would like to answer the second question. So can I invite you to just stay and chat with everyone on the panel, because we are out of time. And to be fair to the other groups and the workshops, we do need to wrap this. I want to thank all of the panelists for being with us this morning. Steve, Ben, George, Lewis, and Mauro. And also I want to thank all of you for coming out so early on a very cold winter's morning in New York. This was a great conversation. I hope that Alep, you were listening and that you are going to make sure that your panel has all the answers to all the problems we've put out in the world. And thank you all for being here.